Well, thank you. Thank you for those kind words. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for inviting me to be here tonight. I'm truly humbled and I'm truly honored. And thanks for allowing me to give the last lecture. And I would like to also point out that in our midst tonight is Dr. Novan, who gave the very first lecture at the WSU College of Medicine when it opened in 2017 with the inaugural class. And since then, he's given his first lecture 6 more times, excuse me. So I think the 7th iteration of the first lecture has been delivered. So George, thank you for being here tonight. So with that in mind, the last lecture, as Darren had pointed out, is sort of inspired through this computer science professor at Carnegie Mellon University who was delivering a truly last lecture in the setting of metastatic pancreatic cancer. And so that's quite a privilege to have programs like this as enduring things throughout universities across the country, and for all of you to implement that here tonight is a very, very special gesture, and even for me, a truly special gesture for having you all select me to help out tonight. So with that, the final lecture. So firstly, I'm truly and genuinely humbled to be here. Thank you for selecting me. As far as I know, usual apoptosis is at play. I don't know of anything acute happening, so unless I find something else out, I'll let you know. I hope this is not my last lecture. And lastly, I promise tonight to try and avoid any renal stuff or the Krebs cycle, for the most part. I have the best job in the world. I am very blessed and I'm very thankful for having found a calling and finding a path that has been just wonderful and something that has been a rewarding journey and continues to be a rewarding journey. And I'm so thankful to have this. And so why do I like my job? It's because I get to learn something new every day, and I get to help people in many ways, whether it's helping students or helping patients or helping neighbors or staff or anybody else in between. But how do we help other people? We can do so through teaching. We can do so through sometimes practicing medicine and offering treatments. We can pay things forward, and in particular, I would also like to acknowledge Dr. Novan and Dr. Palpant as being amazing teachers and mentors. They were both the residency program directors during my internal medicine residency, and they're a big part of why I wound up here. And so to have such incredible teachers and mentors, and even having them here tonight is particularly special. So thank you, George and Sam. And then lastly, how do we help people? We do this by listening, and we listen to stories. And stories is the theme of my presentation tonight. So stories, listening, and learning. I don't know that I have anything super poignant to point out. We have Dr. Glenn Johnson here from the School of Communications who's going to probably critique me at the end of this presentation or give me some homework afterwards. So, but also thank you, Glenn. I'm just very, very honored that you're here as well. So in telling stories, stories we learn, and we learn them through listening. And if we're going to listen, first we have to hear. And hearing it's a mechanical, it's a physiologic process. You know, there's sound waves, they're conducted. We have sensory neural hearing, we have conductive hearing, and hearing is hearing. But the beauty of stories is that we hear these stories, but in order to really appreciate them, we have to listen. And so my goal tonight is to go through the process of listening and where I have found that to be particularly helpful in my own life. So you didn't necessarily come here for an anthropology lecture, but I'll start out with that nonetheless. So hominids, who are our prehistoric ancestors as they roamed the earth, They learned to manage fire about 1 million years ago. And fire was instrumental because at that point in life, as it were, it was something that provided light in the night, it provided heat, it kept predators away, it allowed for new and unique ways of preparing food, and dietary changes happen. Tools were forged, and it was all through fire that all of this was able to happen. But probably even more importantly, rather than having to forge our own tools and all of that, is the fact that when you sit around a fire, stories are told. Okay? And stories are not necessarily just heard. And so the goal for tonight is to appreciate the fact that stories are something that we learn from because we listen to them. So as time went on, stories were told, probably even before written language, and the spoken lore was carried on mainly through the act of listening. And so when it comes to stories, I'll present some of mine tonight, some that I hope you enjoy, but we all have one story, we all have some stories, we all have stories that we share in common. And the stories might be who we are. So are we students? Are we faculty? Are we medical students? Are we spouses? Are we children? And whatever that might be. Or where are we? We are here in this beautiful setting tonight, spending time together. But also, it's who are we or where are we in terms of location? We're in Spokane, Washington. We are at the Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine. We are on the ancestral tribal lands of the Coeur d'Alenes and other confederated tribes, and just things that we should acknowledge and pay attention to. And then a couple other things to think about is, why are we here? We're here to spend time together. You're here to listen to my hopefully not too corny stories, and what things can we share. And then lastly, how did we get here? And we each have a different path that's brought us here. Mine came through my education and my residency and my fellowship, and others have come here for employment, others have come here to go to school. But we all share something very special in common, which is that bond of this calling to pursue medicine, to help people, and to hopefully make society a better place in the end. And each doing our small contribution along the way. So first, I'd like to give you a brief history of medicine, because as you'll see, over the millennia, we have come a very, very long way. So says the patient, "Doctor, I have an earache." So says the doctor, in the year 2000 BC, said, "Here, eat this root." Okay. So then 1,000 years later, that root is heathen, say this prayer if you want to treat your earache. So by the year 1680, that prayer is a superstition, drink this potion. By 1920, that potion is snake oil, swallow this pill. By 1985, that pill is ineffective, take this antibiotic. And by the year 2024, that antibiotic is a chemical, here, eat this root. Okay, so some things have changed and some things haven't. So another important story I'd like to briefly acknowledge is a story that we all share together here tonight, and that's the acknowledging Dr. Elson Floyd, who was an amazing person, and he's the namesake, obviously, of this College of Medicine. And Dr. Floyd, not long after the school was established, passed away from metastatic cancer. And so, but in the years leading up to that, many of us were fortunate enough to meet Dr. Floyd. And so, I played a very small role, and many other people played small roles. Others played huge roles. But along the way, the state of Washington was able to develop a new medical school. And so we have our campuses spread between Spokane and the Tri-Cities and Vancouver and Everett, and we're all here. And so through this, we have the class of 2026, here now. And because of that, the class of 2027 is here. And a lot of this was accomplished because of this steadfast advocacy that Dr. Floyd had in really, really wanting this school to exist and to succeed. And the amount of community involvement and statewide involvement, and especially in the end, going to the legislature and having successful legislation passed to bring this school into being was tremendous. And so here's Dr. Floyd shaking Governor Inslee's hand after the legislation was passed. But for some of you may know that, some may not. Legislation actually had to be passed that changed a law from, I think, 1917 or 1918 that said that the University of Washington would have the medical school and WSU would have the veterinary school. And so that law actually had to be changed in order for WSU to open a school. So Dr. Floyd was a very, very impressive person, very personable. He was a very stately person. And the one thing I will always remember about him is he always remembered your name. So if you went to an event, he would remember your name from prior events. And so, there is no better person than him to have named the school after. So nextly, some things you may not know about me, because I don't necessarily talk about these in the physiology lectures or whatever, because they're really not pertinent. So I thought I'd share those with you tonight. So first of all, I don't come from a medical family. So I don't have a lot of physicians in the background. I'm a first-generation student, so I'm very, very fortunate to have gone to college and done what I liked. And my parents, they immigrated here separately, their families, following, actually in the 1950s, after the Second World War. My mom and dad's families both immigrated over to the United States, predominantly for opportunity. Ich spreche Deutsch, so I learned how to speak German growing up, and I still habla Deutsch. But it's very easy to do when you're hungry and you're thirsty and you're really small. So if you have those needs, it's very easy to learn a language very quickly. My dad was born in the most eastern province called Ostpreußen, or it's in East Prussia that doesn't exist anymore. But that's in, we'll talk about that in the middle. You'll love this name. You guys can say this 10 times fast. But my mom is from this little town called Brunsbüttel, and this is a small coastal town that we'll talk about. It's about 100 kilometers outside of Hamburg. I have one older brother. He's an electrical engineer. For 2 years, I rowed for the UC Irvine crew team. And then I had to choose between classes and rowing, and so ultimately classes won out. So, plus the U.S. Olympic team, as far as I know, they really weren't looking for me, but I tried. So, and then I have a beautiful wife, Rhonda, and my son, William, and my daughter, Anna, who are with me here tonight. So, again, thank you for having us. So, with that in mind, let's talk about early learning and early listening. So my wife's family, they have a little lake, or a little home, little cabin in Lincoln City. And so it's not just right up from the ocean. And for those of you who may or may not have been to Lincoln City, it's on the Oregon coast, and the Lincoln City beach is about 7 miles long. So you can just walk out there for endless periods of time, picking up shells or walking in the water or getting sand blasted by the sand and the wind or what have you. And we would go there and still go there as much as we can to spend time there. So this was about 2012. I think my son is 8 here and my daughter's around 5. And here we are at the Oregon coast on a lovely trip. And here we are again. And one of the really neat things in the Oregon coast in Lincoln City is they have this thing called the Finders Keepers program. So every year, the glass artisans, or the glass blowing artisans on the Oregon coast, they will make the number of glass balls as the year. So this is in 2012, so there were 2012 glass balls made. And they kind of get randomly put out in places behind driftwood or out in the water or where have you. And sometimes you just find one. It's like, it's like a really random, super duper special event. And so this particular year, and this is really special because you don't find these things very easily. And voila. So there we are. So we found a glass ball. So this beautiful blue glass orb, and we were all excited about it. So we took it down to the community center where you register your glass ball because there's a number on there. And then you find out who the glass artist was and what little shop it was that came from. And it's a really super exciting thing to have. So we found this. And so about a week or 10 days after we were home, of course, this really cool blue orb had to go to school or to preschool for show and tell. So we got this box out and we put all these styrofoam peanuts in there and we really packed the thing in there and brought it to school. And it made it through the day. And then we got home with it. And then as I was getting out of the car, I said, "Now, Anna, leave the box alone. I'll come around and get it." So I no sooner got out of the car and I heard this thump. And there it was. And so this was an exercise in early listening that we were trying to learn about. So, and then ultimately, we kept all the pieces in a bag, and my father-in-law, who's insanely crafty and very, very meticulous, and he's just a really amazing carpenter and so forth, I gave it to him with a bottle of glue for Christmas one year so he could try and put it back together. But it was a joke. And here are William and Anna today. So my parents. So my great-grandfather, in German is called Urgroßvater. My mom's grandfather was the Meister of the Kiel Canal. So that's one little piece of historical interest here. But what is a Kanalmeister and all of this? So I'm trying to find a spot here. If you look, there's a blue line that goes across this. I don't have a pointer on here, or do I? Well, I'll just keep talking. So there's a small blue line there. And if you look at all the red lines, any maritime commerce had to go all the way around the isthmus and the peninsulas and all of that. And there was a lot of extra time added in there. So in the 1890s, the German government put in this canal that connected the North Sea, that's the Nordsee, and the Baltic Sea, which in German is called the East Sea, the Ostsee. And so there's that little blue line that connects those two, and my mom's grandfather was the engineer in charge of building this. And so at the bottom here is a black and white photo of the canal going in. In modern day, this is kind of what it looks like at the mouth of the North Sea, and this is called the Elbe River. And where that red star is, that's right in the neighborhood where my mom grew up. So she was literally right at the front there. And those are all the locks in the front, where the sea, like kind of like the Ballard locks. The sea is the water level is raised and lowers to let ships through. And so it's not uncommon in that area to see great big ships kind of going through the prairie because there's that canal going through there. So that's where my mom hails from. My dad, on the other hand, I hear tons of stories from my dad. And my dad grew up in East Prussia, so if you go up in the dark blue area where the red arrow is where the Prussian-Russian border existed at that time. And it's really hard finding maps because this part of Europe, the maps change like every 15 years for about the last 800 years. So there's a lot of movement there. But this little town my dad grew up in is called Lück. There's the Lutheran church in the upper right-hand corner where he was baptized and attended and all that. And there's the little town there where he grew up in. And today, that whole blue area was split between Poland and Russia at the end of the war. So East Prussia no longer exists. So the map moved again. So from my end, listening to needs and learning how to advocate, something I had never done before, or this event I had never done before. Here's my buddy Jeremy Graham. Some of you may know him, but Dr. Graham is an internist in town. And at the time, so this was in 2014, he and I were very inspired that this whole movement of the Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine wasn't called that then. It was just called Will WSU Get Its Own Medical School? And so we were kind of advocating for that, and there was a lot of back and forth, let's put it that way, across the state about whether or not the school should exist or not. And one of the issues was, and that we had heard, was that there was no community support for the WSU College of Medicine. So one day, Jeremy and I were, if you read this title up here, the Washington Alliance of Teaching Physicians. We belong to that. It sounds very, very important. And maybe it was. But the Washington Alliance of Teaching Physicians was the medical community's support for the development of the College of Medicine. And so for those of you who may or may not recognize this from pop culture, here is Stonehenge being drawn out in the movie Spinal Tap, which is basically in the movie they draw out that they're going to have this Stonehenge feature in their concert. And it's supposed to be 18 feet tall by 18 feet wide. And as you see here, it's 18 inches by 18 inches. And maybe I spoiled the movie for you now. But the Washington Alliance of Teaching Physicians was born on a napkin at Sacred Heart Medical Center in the cafeteria. So we were trying to come up with we were a cause, we knew what we were trying to do, but we needed to come up with a name. So we were trying to come up with an energetic name. So we're like, well, we could be the lightning, or we could be something sparky or something like that. And ultimately, we thought that ATP was a pretty energy-filled thing. So then we said ATP, we'd be like the Alliance of Teaching Physicians. And then it was the Washington Alliance of Teaching Physicians. And you're here you see the two inaugural members of that group. So our goal was to promote this idea to the governor and to whomever else we could. But we didn't want this letter to be like, Dear Governor Inslee, please start a school. Sincerely, Henry and Jeremy. We needed to be more. So we did grow because we ran around the hallways that day, and we got 12 more people to sign on as members. We ran them in the hallway, and we said, hey, you want to be part of ATP? And they're like, sure. So all of a sudden, there were 14 of us. And so that is who penned this, we penned this letter to the governor, signed by all 14 of us. So that was a fun event. So then we had to learn how to spread the word. And so we'd never done this before. So we wrote a guest opinion in the Spokesman Review, the kind of calling for the fact that the state of Washington could use more medical school seats. At the time, we were number 49 out of 50 in medical student seats per capita. And then also, at that time, 54% of the Washington state physicians were in King County. And so the whole goal was why we are all here and why you are all here to help us, to try and help expand the physician people power across the state. Then we added another one to the Seattle Times. And this was a super interesting time for me because this is just when newspapers were starting to go online, and then you could start commenting about articles. And I learned a ton from the comments in here. Like I learned that I was a burned out family doctor. Another one said I was a burned out ER doctor. There were a lot of Apple Cup references, and so forth. So it was a very interesting time in terms of how news was delivered. And so, but no, we didn't really get any grief for doing this. So that was that was an interesting time. So now let's just take a few steps back and go to my own medical school experience, because there are a lot of things I remember, some things I don't remember, and then some things I remember really well. And so I'd like to share some of those with you today. So the year is 1989. So yes, I started medical school in 1989. And here's most of my class sitting on the steps here, and I can name every one of their faces, and I can tell you exactly what they went into, and they're just all a bunch of wonderful people. And so 1989, I had just graduated from college, and I had done a lot of biochemistry in my life, and I was excited to be in medical school now because, they're really going to teach it to us now. We're going to learn this stuff, and we're really going to see how it fits in. And so in the biochemistry class, we had two options. Well, actually, we had the class and then an extra option if you wanted to do it. So there was the usual class, usual lectures, and then we got like this work packet with all these problems you could do where you could really learn how to do this stuff. And so I, regrettably, spent all this time working on this problem set Because, what do I need to know all that other memorization stuff for? That's not learning. So anyway, so biochemistry was well underway. And, here we are learning about the Krebs cycle. And I told you I would not do much, but some. And then the first exam rolled around, and I got a D because I studied this worksheet packet, and the test had all these things on there like match this restriction enzyme, or match the restriction enzyme with the amino acid pair or sequence that it cleaves. And I was like, oh, I don't know. But anyway, so I was pretty devastated. That was my first exam in medical school. I bombed. And I'd never gotten a D, like all of you. I'd never gotten a D in my life. So I was devastated. And then I finally just was able to shake it off, realizing I only had about 247 more tests to take before I would get through the first 2 years. And so life went on, and I did survive. So then came physiology. It's the same year. So this is the physiology story, and this is the time when we're learning about how hearts work and lungs and the hematologic system and the skin and the GI tract, renal function, right? I mean, and you think you have me nailed here, right? So that my passion for renal stuff was not born. So here are these awful fluid boxes, right? So how does a fluid shift, and how does a fluid shift with volume versus osmolality, and how do these different hormones change these things, and what's water doing and what's sodium doing? And I spent all this time studying this stuff, and just like here, solid lines were normal, dotted lines were disease. And so the exam rolled around, and I got an F. And I was just devastated. And so I looked at it and I was like, wait a minute, I completely understand this stuff, but Dr. White, he changed the dashed lines and the solid lines on the test. So dotted lines were normal, solid lines were disease, and so I got them all backwards wrong, however it went. But I was devastated. So I was going to go talk to him because I wanted to prove how well I understood this stuff. And so I made an appointment, and I met with Dr. White, and I pled my case. And I said, Dr. White, I'm here because I bombed your test, but I really understand this stuff, and I'd like you to reconsider. And he looked at me and he said, do you know how to read instructions? And I said, no, I don't. And I just kind of put my stuff together, and thank you for your time, and I left. So that was that. So that was a very memorable event. And so... and fast forward, here I am doing that stuff, sort of. So, within my class, I can guarantee you my class personalities were no different than your class personalities, because I think medicine and the admissions process probably selects for that, or the fact that we want to do this stuff, we select for that. And so we were probably every bit as compulsive as you are, and I'll bet we were every bit as determined as you are, and we were every bit as competitive as you are, and I don't think anything's changed. And so this is the story of my classmate Gene, because Gene was is an awesome person, and he was my wonderful classmate, and I was just not going to let him outdo me, right? So this is the story of technology and learning to look the part. So one day, this is our first year medical school, first year medical school. Gene showed up to class, and he's wearing this thing. It's a pager. It's like, what do you want a pager for? So you have to remember, at this point in time, there were no cell phones. There were no other gadgets. It was, if you wanted to get a hold of somebody, you had to pick up the phone, dial their phone number, their pager phone number, punch in the numbers, and hang up, and then hope they call you back. But this was like the mark of the practicing physician. I mean, it was cool to have a pager. And I didn't have one. But Gene showed up to class with a pager on, and we're like, what on earth do you need a pager for? Like the ER's calling, we need a stat consult on oxidative phosphorylation or something like that. And so, what are we going to offer? And so, anyway, he's wearing a pager, and I was not going to be outdone by Gene. So I showed up one day wearing my garage door opener, okay? And I would sit in the back, and every once in a while I'd just pick it up and click and just make sure I got my garage door closed. But I was not going to let him outdo me because he had this technology that really was the mark of the up-and-coming physician. And so, now we have smartphones, which have basically taken over everything. They've taken over our phones, our pagers, our email, our cameras, our video cameras. I mean, just everything's been taken over. And so, it's not as, but at that time it was really cool. But now we all have smartphones. And then actually I was going to put a rotary phone on here too, but that's how communication was done, was through touch phones and pagers. So learning to not forget about empathy, because empathy is a very important part, as we'll talk about. And remember, empathy is this sense that we can relate to other persons and their feelings in their given situation. And I just want to point out here that this continues to be true. These pieces of data keep showing up. But here's an article from 2020 that just goes on to show us that medical students become less empathic towards patients throughout the course of medical school. And that may very well be true. And the only reason I point that out is I don't know that I have the solution other than that we should be mindful of that, right? Maybe reset our bearings from time to time. But being able to empathize with patients is a critical part to what we do, critical in some future slides I have here. So in terms of empathy, I want to share with you this story about a patient I followed named Mary. And so this is where I experienced a super important lesson in super important lesson in learning how to listen. And so Mary was this 62-year-old lady. She had a history of breast cancer, and she was a retired nurse. And I wound up ultimately meeting her because she had chronic kidney disease. She had this nephritic-looking urine, right, blood and protein, right? And so on her kidney biopsy, she had membranoproliferative glomerulonephritis, for those of you who remember what MPGN is. And so this was a pretty big part of her life because now we had to start treating her with chemotherapy and so forth. And so I had her on chemotherapy for quite some time. But at that point in time, the treatments were not as good as they probably are now. But chemotherapy was starting to fail. And unfortunately, her chronic kidney disease progressed to end-stage kidney disease, so to the point where she needed to start dialysis, which is what was done. And Mary did really well on dialysis for a while. And then her dialysis dependency was followed by a successful kidney transplant. And so that was an absolutely wonderful thing. So Mary actually had a goodly number of years with a successful kidney transplant. One thing I don't expect you to know, but MPGN is one of these diseases that can return in a kidney transplant, and unfortunately it did. So some years later, her native disease returned, and in the course of that, with her worsening kidney disease, she developed calciphylaxis, which we talked about in class. And so you wind up with these non-healing wounds in the skin because of calcium and phosphorus deposition. But they're extremely painful. You get neuropathic pain with it. It's extremely difficult to treat. And Mary's condition had changed a lot, and the pain was just unrelenting for her. And so she had no interest in returning to dialysis with these wounds that she had and how much discomfort that was causing her. And so through the course of this and these discussions, she told me one day in the office that I don't want to do this anymore. And so we talked about end-of-life issues and having her enroll in hospice. So initially, in order to get her there, I had to put her in the hospital just for pain relief. And so we had her in the hospital. And then during that hospital stay, I got her hairdresser to come in and give her a kind of a last haircut, if you will, and kind of, make her feel like a person. And so her hairdresser came in. And then a couple of days after that, she was admitted to hospice. And so following her hospice admission, I used to go and visit her a number of days per week on the way home, and we would talk about things, and we would see how she was doing, and we would reminisce on things and just try to be human about what we were talking about. And then after close to a month, it was on Christmas, she passed away. And so while I was visiting her, the week prior to her passing, she gave me something. So this was a painting that her neighbor had painted, and she gave this to me, and she said, "Here, I'd like you to have this." And so this is entitled Twilight on the Tamaracks. And so this is kind of what tamarack trees look like and so forth. And so through this painting, which I still have up in my office, it reminds me of this aphorism from Hippocrates, which was to sometimes cure, to often treat, and to always comfort. And again, that was through Hippocrates. And along with that painting came this card, which I still have. And so in it, she writes, Dr. Mroch, we all come to you asking, no, expecting your help. Seldom ever do we know how to thank you. That continues to be true even now. Hopefully this picture will help you understand how you compare to others, doctors, and so forth in my eyes. Thank you, Henry, for everything. You are a prince and dearly cared about. Sorry I'm so runny, but wanted to say thank you. And then this was her card that accompanied that. And this I really cherish because every time I see that painting, that whole journey sort of comes back to mind. And it's something that's very special and something we're very privileged to get to experience with our patients. And so I just wanted to share that story with you. And then we'll switch to listening to learn. So, and through Mary, outside our family, there are no closer ties than those that exist between doctors and their patients. And I think that holds true. Cure is not what everyone is expecting from you or us. Patients and their families may be seeking support, a friendly hand, or a caring soul. And these are two comments out of the British Medical Journal that have to do with empathy and learning to listen. So with that in mind, I have another very favorite patient who I still learned a lot from. So becoming a good listener, which is something I still try to do. So try to practice medicine with the same ethics and principles you believed in when you started medical school, right? Let's try not to lose our empathy along the way. Now, along the way, one thing that doesn't show up super well here on the screen, I don't think, but we interrupt people all the time, right? And so we have to interact with our patients, we ask questions, but we also have to listen. We really do have to listen. And sometimes the hardest thing to do is to listen. And so if you look at a lot of data out there, this article in particular, this is from 2017, talks about how physicians interrupt their patients from between 18 and 23 seconds of them asking their first question. And I challenge all of us to lengthen that time. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's easy, but in general, we interrupt people. It doesn't matter how many, but we interrupt people within seconds of asking them questions. And sometimes they need more than a few seconds to let us know what's going on, or it takes them more than a few seconds for them to warm up to us if they're meeting us for the first time. So here I think I have it circled in there, but that's the short time that we give patients to actually give an answer, and sometimes we need to allow them a lot more than that. So be mindful when you're talking to patients and you're learning how to interview them. Give them a chance to say something, because that's generally where the true answers lie, is listening to them. So now, from hearing to listening, this is my story of Mildred. I don't remember her first name, so I referred to her as Mildred. So here's Sacred Heart Medical Center in Spokane, Washington, sometime in the late fall. Blue sky outside, as you can see. And so here is this delightful 70-year-old lady I met in the emergency room, and she was in with acute kidney injury, among other things. But so I was asked to come down and see her in the emergency room, and she had abdominal pain, and she was confused, and she did not look good, and she looked dehydrated. Well, she looked volume depleted. She just looked sick. And so I had a chance to talk to her, and I examined her, and I reviewed labs and figured out what medications we should try, and I started her on IV fluids, and so on and so forth. So I tried to do the best I could to take care of her. And then I asked her, so, Mildred, is there anything else? So now she's up in her room. Is there anything else concerning you? I waited, and she said, it's raining in here. I was like, so again, there's this blue sky outside. So I was like, oh, well, okay, sure. It's raining, very good. I know you're confused and ill-appearing and volume depleted, so I'll see you tomorrow. So for the next 3 days, I would see Mildred. And, I thought I just finished my internal medicine boards and my nephrology boards, and I really felt like I knew what was going on. And she had probably this systemic immune response syndrome, and she had this leukocytosis that was getting better, and her hemodynamics were looking better, and all this medical stuff was looking better. And for the next 3 days, Mildred said, it's raining in here. And you look outside, and the sky was as clear as the blue sky here. And then on hospital day 5, the ceiling broke open, and the pipe had ruptured in the ceiling and was pouring down on Mildred and the lady in the room next door. And so this was the raining that she was talking about. So, of course, I had it all figured out. I just thought she was, either delusional or confusional or maybe early dementia or whatnot. But she told me for 5 days that the ceiling was leaking, but I didn't listen to one word of it. So I've always remembered this story because she told me for 5 days, not 5 minutes, not 5 seconds, but she told me for 5 days, and I did not listen to her. And so that's my story of Mildred. So why should we strive to be good listeners? And I'm not going to make any make great points here, but most everything we do clinically is going to hinge on the history and the physical. It really is. And the more time you spend taking a good history and performing a good physical exam, all the stuff, everything else we learn about, the blood work and the this and the MRIs and the ultrasounds and the x-rays and the nuclear medicine tests, and all this stuff, that helps us confirm what we think is going on, or at least I think that's the way it should be. And so according to these articles, and there's an abundance of them out there, they've even had physicians try and make diagnoses just with the history, and then with the physical, and then with the stuff, and then with the other testing. And about 90% of the time, it's still somewhere between 76 and 90%, whoever you read, has to do with the taking the time to take a good history and physical exam. So I know we ask a lot of you to memorize all these crazy pathways and what drugs are doing and what cell membrane changes are happening and all that, but I challenge you, take the time to talk to your patients and get good stories from them, because it really is rewarding. So in my own career now, I've gone from rotary phone to touch tone phone to pagers to smartphones and email. Now I've even discovered through my kids and even through a lot of you, email's kind of passe. We got to have some social media way of communicating. And so all these modes of communication are continuing to change. And now there's this whole issue about artificial intelligence, right? So it's all these generative protocols where machine learning is going to help us learn how to do things better. And according to some articles, AI might replace us, right? If we read the articles, there's this chance that will AI substitute doctors in the healthcare industry? And so, you can ask for your tuition refund now, or the other option is just trying to find out whether there's merit to this or not. So now what is ChatGPT? If you're not familiar with ChatGPT, this is just one of the many generative protocol machines that does machine learning. And here not too long ago, ChatGPT passed several board exams. So board exams in ophthalmology, it passed the USMLE with a 60% accuracy. It passed a college-level microbiology quiz at 95%. and it passed another clinical reasoning thing with a score of 72 at Stanford. So, I mean, these machines can learn things, and remember, these machines are learning from what we teach them to learn. And so where does that go? So there's this increasing questioning of where does artificial intelligence take its role in all of this. But the real issue is, are there things that AI will not do for us? Right? And that kind of comes back, hopefully, to some earlier comments made. So personal uses of AI. Some of your upperclassmates and all that, we'd published this article about somebody who had bilateral renal cell cancer and wound up losing both adrenal glands in the process and developed this thing called Nelson syndrome. So that's hyperpigmentation from high ACTH levels. ACTH has homology with melanocyte stimulating hormone, so you get like brown lines. They look tan. You get brown spots, creases in the palms turn brown, all this. So, and we had a patient with that, and we wrote this article. And around the time we were trying to get it submitted, this competition came out about using ChatGPT in some way with your submitted article. So we did that. We thought, well, what could we do? So we said, well, let's take our concluding paragraph, and we'll upload it into ChatGPT, and we'll see what it says. And in fact, probably the wordsmithing was a little bit better, but about the same. So, but still, it did a good job. I was very impressed. And then we asked it to do a literature search for us because we thought there's got to be articles out there that we missed. And so it gave us some articles that we should have included. So we took those articles and we couldn't find them. So we found that we couldn't find any of these articles. There were 3 of them, but we couldn't find them anywhere in the published literature. In fact, the 3 journals that it referenced don't exist. And so what it had done is it had taken a lot of author names, article titles, and journal titles, and kind of got creative with them and made up its own hybridized art. You guys want the drapes down a little bit? There's a lot of, you guys are okay? All right. So but anyway, so that's the use of ChatGPT in just submitting a journal article. So lesson learned from this was super interesting case from our standpoint, but the bigger learning point was the fact that we have to be cautious about what information it throws back at us. So the future of medicine, if I look back at when I started school and going through school, I can't say that I wasn't aware of changes that were going to happen. A lot of the stuff going on now was just flat out unknowable. Like, I don't even know how we would have guessed this stuff was going to come into existence. And if you would have told me that ChatGPT was going to roll around and it would do all that stuff, I would shrug my shoulders and said, yeah, sure, okay. So, but right now in our own careers, we're going to have these unknowable advances in data management and how do we implement all of that. And, I come from this generation where we had these things called textbooks, and we had overhead projectors, and we had slide projectors, and that was it. And if you were super cool, you had a pager, okay? But that's sort of where things started for me, and now we have email, PowerPoint, internet is incredible, computers, social media, artificial intelligence. I mean, all these things just are so rapidly expanding. And so learning how to incorporate artificial intelligence into patient care is going to be really interesting. And I can't really say that I'm too worried about losing my job through AI, because I'm just not sure that AI can replace direct patient care. I'm not convinced of that. So will it take over the practice of medicine? No, I doubt it. But I do think it will fundamentally change how we practice, but I'm not sure what that is yet, but something will change. But some things aren't going to change, okay? My prediction is that we will rely even more heavily on human qualities and human interactions. I don't know, even for my own healthcare, I don't know that I want to just interact with a chat bot and have it make my decisions for me and recommendations and all. And so it's going to be compassion and empathy and interpersonal communication and instinct that we all still have to rely upon, that I don't think ChatGPT or the other programs like that will do that. So, what things can AI not teach us? Okay, so in German there's a term called Augenblickdiagnose, which means Augen is eye, Blick means like a flash or like a blink, and then diagnose is diagnosis. And so that's a blink of an eye, diagnosis. And so here you are, you're on your rounds or you're in your clinic or wherever you are, whether it's next week or 20 years from now, and you walk into the exam room and you say, hey, flex your muscle for me. And so the patient flexes their muscle, and you guys know what this is? Okay, it's called the Popeye sign, and so I think that's the lateral head of the biceps tendon. But anyway, you can look at that. You can look at that and say, hey, there's a biceps tendon that's not working right. You don't need AI to figure that out for you. And in fact, you probably figured out faster than AI could do that for you. Or you can walk in the room, and this person is in the room, and you can say, wow, you have conjunctivitis. No, they don't. Okay. This is what somebody who has Graves' disease, right? So you wind up with this endophthalmitis. But you can walk in the room and look at that, and I mean, you know exactly what that is. I hope you know exactly what that is. Or if you don't, you will know exactly what that is. But that's somebody who has like an immune hyperthyroidism, and it causes the exophthalmos here. And don't think we don't notice these things. I mean, you walk in, you can see the biceps. You can walk in, you can see if somebody looks swollen and edematous. You can walk in and tell if they're blue. You can walk in and see if they have exophthalmos. Or you can walk into lecture, and I can tell when I'm boring the daylights out of people, right? So when you start talking about the net filtration, pressure calculations, and all that, this is the usual response. And so I do appreciate that. So these are things we pick up on. These are things that are not lost to artificial intelligence. So listening and learning into the future. Let's fast forward to the year 2062. That's a while from now, but that's about 35 years from now, and your class may be taking your white coats off for the very last time. Okay, you just had your white coat ceremony last year. Now you may be taking it off because it's time for you to do something else. But it will be less laden, right, with medical instruments and drool and coffee stains and pen marks and all of that. But it will have become much heavier laden with knowledge and responsibility. And so if you get to this point where you're determining that somebody has a very weak pulse, and this is how you're doing it, then it's probably time to hang up your white coat. Okay, so the necktie is not used for checking the pulse, right? So, but there's a lot of time that will transpire, and so many things that will happen in between. So, suggestions for the last lecture: interviewing patients is going to be one of the hardest things you have to learn. I mean, and I'm still learning how to do that now. Listening and processing what our patients are telling us is a career-long endeavor. And one thing I'd like you to remember is that the words that we say to patients and their families, are very powerful. But the words patients have to say to us have even more power, provided we listen. And so therefore, therein lies the challenge. So don't let your white coat fabric get so thick that you don't have time to listen to your patients and don't have it serve as a barrier to that. Take a moment to sit with your patients. And time pressures, I do understand, but still, make that time to sit with your patients and try to take in some time for a good story from them. So, machine learning and inspiration. So I was thinking about things, and I thought, gosh, what was a great moment in school? And I was like, well, I don't know, I'll ask ChatGPT. So you is me. So I wrote, write an inspirational quote about a medical student delivering their first baby. So here's what ChatGPT told me. It says, within the hands of a medical student lies the power to witness miracles unfold. As they deliver their first baby, they not only bring life into the world, but carry a torch of compassion, knowledge, and dedication. In this transformative moment, they embody the promise of healing and the profound impact of their journey toward becoming healers. That's inspiring. Maybe not. So this is what ChatGPT tried to inspire me with. Or we can do the year 1992. And here's my classmate Dan and I. And it was so busy at the labor and delivery unit that Dan and I got to deliver this cute little baby. And so there's nothing that ChatGPT and there's nothing that words can ever do to describe the feeling we had when we were able to do that. So, that's another thing that AI cannot take away from us. Okay, so I'm very excited for these moments for all of you in your own careers. So, I like to talk about this backpacking trip I took a few years ago to the Bob Marshall Wilderness. Some of you like my grizzly bear components to it and some don't. But either way, one of the nights, this is getting toward the end of it, we're just settling for the evening. It was dusk and there were a bunch of us there. And if you notice, there's a fire in the background. So what's one of the first things we did when we were there? There's nothing out there, by the way. We're like 100 miles from any civilization. And so here we started our fire. And there's a quote by this Irish poet, William Yeats, called, "Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire." And so it's that lighting of the fire that I hope all of you are able to experience, where you can start having this passion and drive toward exciting things and beautiful things in your own career. And it's not just accumulating, breadcrumbs along the way or whatnot and filling our pail, but it's lighting this passion that we have for what we do. And so around these campfires is where the stories are told, but these stories are being told to be listened and to be learned. And so with that, I encourage you, be good listeners, be good learners, take time for your patients. Thank you for inviting me, and go Cougs.